Hello, everyone. My name is George Demokopoulos. I'm the co-director of the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon, or this afternoon in New York anyway. We have guests from all over. This is the second of a two-part series that we've done with Capella Romana. We look forward, I think they've been so interesting so far, and we've gotten so much enthusiasm. I'm sure Alex will find a way to do additional things in the future. One very quick bit of business on the Fordham side, which is that we do all kinds of webinars and events. And just a quick plug for the next one we're doing, which will be next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And the topic is political protest, theological dissent in the Orthodox Church, religion and freedom in the post-communist Orthodox world. So if you're interested in such things, tune in next week. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Alexander Lingus, the musical director of Capella Romana and responsible for so much more. But I'm going to turn it over to him now, and we will be off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George, and many thanks to you and everyone at the Orthodox Study Center at Fordham. It's fantastic to be able to participate and add to the conversation a bit of music. Now, the purpose of these webinars, which are also part of Capella Romana's own series of online explorations, is to shed light on contemporary challenges for sung worship in the Orthodox churches of America by considering musical perspectives often ignored or taken for granted in pastoral or academic writing on Orthodox liturgy. Music needs to enter the conversation for two reasons. It's integral to the traditions of corporate worship. In other words, we sing all our services. And then also together with language, which is the focus of this webinar, it is one of the two main ways in which Orthodox services have been adapted over the past millennium for celebration in particular times and places. So today's topic is language in American Orthodox music, liturgical and pastoral perspectives. It's often been asserted that it is the tradition of the Orthodox Church to worship in the local language. So evidence for this begins with the liturgical diversity of late antiquity, Latin, Greek, and Syriac, and various other languages. And then moving on, of course, to the great missions to the Slavs of St. Cyril and Methodius, and then even the modern era with the Russian missions to the Far East and Alaska. Yet, as any of us who've been to North American Orthodox churches know, that the historical reality has been much more complex. And so, although the audible portions of Eastern Christian worship are devoted almost entirely to singing, the reason we're having this panel is because the musical part of that, the role that music plays in becoming somehow inculturated, that is part of a particular location along with language, has received relatively little attention. So leading today's exploration of how music affects changing relationships between heritage and local languages in the Orthodox churches of America will be my friend and colleague, Richard Barrett. Richard Barrett is the executive director of Ages Initiatives, which distributes service texts and liturgical music to Orthodox parishes throughout the world, including actually to where I am right now, the United Kingdom. They've been partners with Capella Romana and the Archdiocese of Thyatira over the past few years. And he's also artistic director of the St. John of Damascus Society, which supports the performance and dissemination of Orthodox sacred music for the general public. I mean, he has a very distinguished biography of many things that he's done, but to move the panel forward, I'll just hand it over to Richard.
Thank you so very much, Alex. It's a joy and an honor to be able to participate in this today. As was observed and discussed 2 weeks ago in the previous Fordham and Capella Romana panel, the factors of immigration, electroacoustic and communication technology, and conversion have resulted in unprecedented close contact between Orthodox cultures and their musical repertories, as well as with historically non-Orthodox cultures and their musics. Central to this contact are language and its elevation through singing, with the matter of liturgical language posing questions about pastoral ministry, acculturation, mission, and music. By no means are these exclusively Anglophone concerns either. Language change, the coexistence of multiple liturgical languages, and their impact on musical practice have been realities for the post-Ottoman Middle East and the post-Soviet Balkans and Eastern Europe as well, as members of our own panel have seen firsthand. In hopes that we can reach a broader understanding of the issues surrounding liturgical language and music, including, but by no means exclusive to, approaches to translation as both a pastoral and a missionary activity, the impact of both language change and preservation on acculturation, and the implications for musical adaptation and composition, we will turn now to our distinguished panel. Joining us are Dr. Vitaly Permiakov, who is Assistant Professor of Liturgical Theology at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Born to a Russian family in Riga, Latvia, he relocated to the United States in 1999 after completing his undergraduate studies. He graduated from St. Vladimir's Seminary in 2004 and enrolled in a doctoral program in liturgical studies at the University of Notre Dame, where in 2012 he defended his dissertation on the history and origins of the Byzantine Rite for the consecration of churches. In 2008 and 2009, he was Junior Fellow in Byzantine Studies at Dumbarton Oaks Research Library and Collection in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Permiakov taught at Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary in Jordanville, New York, the seminary of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, from 2011 to 2020. And he joined the full-time faculty at St. Vladimir's Seminary in August of 2020. He recently co-edited the 2-volume Liturgical, a standard service book for the Orthodox Church in America, and edited a revised bilingual Slavonic and English publication of the Liturgy of St. James. In 2021, on the Feast of the Annunciation, he was ordained subdeacon at Three Hierarchs Chapel at St. Vladimir's Seminary. Also joining us is Dr. Jessica Suchy-Pilalis, who is professor of music at the Crane School of Music, State University of New York at Potsdam, where she teaches music theory, harp, and Byzantine music. She has directed chant choirs, presented lectures, and has taught numerous seminars and workshops across the United States and Canada. In 1984, she became what is thought to be the first salaried and officially titled female protopsaltis, or chanter, of the Greek Orthodox Church of North and South America. And in addition to degrees in music theory and performance from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Eastman School of Music, and Indiana University, she holds diplomas with highest honors in Byzantine music from 2 Greek conservatories. She is also certified by both the State and Church of Greece, and is a tonsured reader and chanter. In 2006, she was awarded the St. Romanos Medallion, the highest honor bestowed to a musician in the Greek Archdiocese of America, for significant national contributions to church music by the National Forum of Greek Orthodox Church Musicians. Currently, she chants at St. Olympia Orthodox Church in Potsdam, New York, and Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. Also joining us is the Reverend Father John Almassy, who was born and raised in Anfech, Lebanon, where he studied Byzantine chant under the tutelage of the renowned teacher, Father Nicholas Malik, receiving his certification at the age of 18. He continued on to Hellenic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, where he graduated with a Master of Divinity degree in December of 2013. He also was a key member of the school's St. Romanos the Melodist Choir, as well as a member of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocesan Choir, the Choir of St. Mark, and Dunya. He served as the protopsaltis of St. George Antiochian Orthodox Church in Boston until his assignment in summer of 2013 as an assistant and chanter for the late Metropolitan Philip. This assignment included teaching Byzantine music to the seminarians of the Antiochian Archdiocese studying at St. Vladimir's Seminary. Father John was ordained to the holy priesthood by His Eminence Metropolitan Joseph on August 30th, 2020 at St. Peter and Paul Antiochian Orthodox Church in Potomac, Maryland, and currently serves at St. George Antiochian Orthodox Church in Washington, D.C. So welcome to all 3 of you. So first, to set the stage and give our audience an entry point for our discussion, I would like to begin with a brief example of different English versions of ostensibly the same hymns from what is called the Paschal Canon. For those who are not familiar, briefly speaking, the canon is a hymnographic genre in which multiple stanzas are divided into usually 8 odes, themselves groupings of short hymns that follow the same theme and, depending on musical repertory, the same metrical pattern and melody. In these examples, we will hear the hymnos, the hymn that establishes the pattern, and the first troparion, or short hymn, from the first ode of the Paschal Canon, not only in 2 different musical settings, but also with 2 different translation approaches. The first recording by the Dynamis Byzantine Ensemble, led by Samuel Heron, is a metrical translation set to the model melody found in the standard Byzantine chant books. And the second recording, by the choir of St. Vladimir's Seminary, is a non-metered translation adapted for the repertory the Russians refer to as Greek chant. Alex, if I could have you start the first example, please. You're muted, Alex.
Sorry, it's just taking me an extra second because there was an update that went on in the background, just to make life interesting. So here we go. Sharing sound and, oops.
Now be jubilant, let the earth now be exalted, let the entire world both visible and invisible now Lord the feast. For Christ our God has risen up, he is our everlasting joy.
Maybe start that. You were muted for a
and so if I mute myself, it mutes my my
yes,
computer sound.
Yes.
It is the day of rest. Of Potsdam, for Christ our God translated us out of death and into life, to heaven from earth. And so we give praise to him as we sing a triumphal song. Glory to your holy resurrection, O Lord. Let us purify our senses, and thus we shall see by the resurrection's divine light unapproachable, like lightning Christ shining forth, and clearly thus we shall hear him saying, rejoice to us as we sing the triumphal song. Glory to your holy resurrection, O Lord. Let the heavens as is fitting now be jubilant, let the earth now be exalted, let the entire world both visible and invisible now Lord the feast. For Christ our God has risen up, he is our everlasting joy.
right. And then the non-metered Russian Greek chant.
What I can do. Oops. There we go.
All right, we got there at the end.
Got there at the end.
Yes. All right, thank you, Alex. So with that as sort of a benchmark and a starting place, I would like to invite each panelist to offer a brief account of on their own of issues such as the relative prominence of the heritage language relative prominence of heritage languages and English, or another vernacular, French or Yupik or something, in sung worship within their respective American jurisdictions, supported with some amount of historical context, and then also their own experiences and perspectives on how music has driven or even resisted linguistic enculturation. And the order we'll go in is Professor Permiakov, Professor Suchy-Pilalis, and Father John. So Professor Permiakov, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here among such distinguished panelists, and to offer my thoughts from the perspective of the Russian church tradition, or rather the churches of the Russian tradition, Russo-Slavic tradition, speaking broadly. I would, of course, first would want to note, of course, that my own specialty is concerns liturgical history, liturgical theology, broadly said, liturgiology. So so liturgical texts rather than musicology. So my own perspective, I enter into this conversation from the perspective concerned with texts rather than with musical settings. So and I would, regarding the linguistic situation, of course, from my own training in liturgical history, I would want to, of course, to note from a historical perspective that multilingual situation was quite common for the ecclesiastical setting of the late antiquity, where our liturgical tradition derives. The use of Greek, Syriac, Georgian, Armenian is well attested for such locations as Patriarchate of Jerusalem, Jerusalem itself, and Lavrovs and Sabas. When the common use of Greek and Syriac is eclipsed with Arabic and with the rise of Islam, we see as a very common feature in the liturgical manuscripts a Arabic marginalia on the in the Greek language liturgical books, serving as sort of notes to the user, that is the priest, sort of using these texts as to the content of the prayer that is being said. So referring to the reflecting the situation when the Greek was still liturgical language, but it was not commonly and already was not a common language, which was easily understood. At least that's how we can interpret this. Now, my own, my own experience relates to the use of liturgical languages in the churches of Russian Russo-Slavic tradition. That is, those specifically, I'll speak about those jurisdictions in North America that have originated from the North American Diocese of the Orthodox Church of Russia, which existed prior to 1917. That is the Orthodox Church in America, Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and to the smallest of them would be the parishes of the Moscow Patriarchate, that is the former exarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church, dissolved in 1970. And immediately, I would like to note that the common background for all of those churches, that is their origin, the linguistic situation from which they, which was originally a default setting, at least when it was one, at least in North America, and it was one diocese, is that, of course, the use of Church Slavonic as liturgical language. With respect to Church Slavonic, of course, very often Russian speakers and Russian ecclesiastical leaders and participants, they tend to perceive Church Slavonic as a rather monolithic language, monolithic tradition. But one of the Russian, renowned Russian liturgiologists, current Russian liturgiologist, Alexei Penkovsky, pointed out that while the Greek text of liturgical books, including liturgical formularies, but likewise the hymnography, the Greek text has shown relative stability over the centuries, from the manuscripts to the printed editions. The Church Slavonic text has significantly evolved, from the first translations of the school of Cyril and Methodius to the most recent redactions of the Church Slavonic books by the Russian, in use by the Russian Orthodox Church, the late 17th century redaction. So the current, and this redaction itself came as a result of the mutual influence of the two uses and dialects of the Church Slavonic language, Russian proper and the Southwest dialect, that is the Ukrainian dialect of the same, or use of the same language. Hence, the current liturgical language of the Russian Orthodox Church is the late 17th, 18th century Russian use of the Church Slavonic. Moreover, which would be a surprise to many Russian Orthodox, Church Slavonic is not an earlier stage in the development of the Russian language. It is a Southern Slavic language, as opposed to the language to the Russian, which is Eastern Slavic. So immediately we have a multilingual situation. So the influence of Church Slavonic upon Russian language has been quite significant, which, however, in the current church situation in the Russian Orthodox Church, does not contribute to the comprehensibility of liturgical texts, and particularly hymnography, or rather the use of the Church Slavonic language in the Russian Church contributes rather to the, I would say, to the illusion of understanding. However, the question of translation into the modern Russian language is very divisive and have caused in the current Russian Orthodox Church has both adherents, both sides have a very fierce and ardent adherence. Interestingly enough, a pre-revolutionary Russian church had no problem blessing the translation of liturgical texts, including the hymnography, into English, for example, or Latvian in 1870s to accommodate a number of converts from the Latvian Lutherans who converted into the Orthodoxy. But there was very difficult debates before the Russian Revolution and at the Council of 1917 with regards to the preservation of Church Slavonic language or transition into Russian. So immediately we have to dispel with the myth that Church Slavonic language is understandable to Russian speakers. But at the same time, this does not immediately translate, does not immediately follow from this, is that there is a generally understood necessity of translating texts into the modern Russian, even though such attempts have been undertaken and still are. So with respect to the Russian churches of Russian tradition in North America, the well-known report to the Assembly of Canonical Bishops in North America, with the data referring to 2011, states that in the OCA, the English as a language of liturgy is used approximately 85% of the parishes, in the ROCOR with 49%, and in the parishes of the Moscow Patriarchate, it's 77%. So the ROCOR, so the Russian Church abroad, which emphasized for many years the necessity of preservation of, it was even a common slogan attributed to Metropolitan Philaret of New York, that keep what you have. And so consistently with that understanding, only rather recently we have seen the publication of editions of the liturgical books. Recently, I mean from say 90s probably, but more broadly in 2000s. With the translation of particular books blessed by the hierarchy of Russian Church abroad, translation of the liturgical text in the English language. With the OCA, the situation changed in the 60s and 70s rather rapidly and dramatically. In the 1960, Metropolitan Leonti, then primate of future OCA, which back then was called Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church of North America, or Metropolia for short, Metropolitan Leonti issued a decree which demanded from the alumni of St. Vladimir's and St. Tikhon's Orthodox seminaries, theological seminaries, a good knowledge of the Church Slavonic language. Because he, as he stated, this is 1960, he stated that if these alumni are hoping to go to the fully English language parish, it would, their hopes will be they would be rather disappointed, because there are not that many fully English speaking languages at that point. So hence they needed to learn Church Slavonic. In 10 years, at the first All-American Council of the now autocephalous Orthodox Church in America, English was acknowledged as the liturgical language of that newly created autocephalous church, with the motivation that the English language, I'm quoting, the English language is the language of our church people, of the people of our church. And this is the only language which allows these faithful to participate in the liturgy consciously and to understand the meaning of what is being done. So rather obvious. However, even at that council, the final decision regarding the language of the liturgy was the final decision was left at the discretion of the rector of the parish. However, the appearance of the English translations of liturgical books in the period after the autocephaly was granted to the OCA also attests to the massive spread of the English as the official liturgical language of the Orthodox Church in America. So already in 1967, we have a official translation of the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil into English, which was approved by the Council of the Metropolia. Then subsequently, that same edition was repeatedly reprinted, reprinted no less than 5 times, with slight corrections to the text. And finally, this edition was, this 1967 translation was thoroughly revised, expanded and corrected, and this was published under the name of Hieraticon or Hieraticon in 2014 and 2017. But at the same time, simultaneously, and this is reflects the situation in the Orthodox Church in America as well. Simultaneously, in 1972, the Synod blessed the translation and another translation of the Evhologion, of the pre-service book, into English by then Bishop Dmitry Royster. So, in addition to that translation, so we have also translations of liturgical books into Spanish, which was, of course, motivated by the reception of the Mexican exarchate into the OCA in 1972. And so there were likewise in 1970s, there were new translations into Yupik, which translated texts which were not yet translated at that point. And the publications in the Orthodox Church in America, the publications which were which concerned the publications which included both texts of Evhologion and the hymnography, like included the popular editions of the text for Holy Week and Pascha. Likewise, we have translations of the other liturgical books, such as Liturgy of Presanctified Gifts and the Book of Needs, and etc. So, at the same time, the translation of hymnography in English, or our publication of complete translations of liturgical books of hymnography into English, is not consistent, and it's not complete. So the text of the Menaion have been actually the complete text of the Menaion has been undertaken into English, has been in the churches, for the churches of the Russian tradition, has been undertaken in the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. This is a translation of the Menaion by Isaac Lambertson, later known as Monk Joseph. Likewise, Rokor also showed a tendency to produce its own translations of the liturgical books, which were already translated in English, into English in the OCA. For example, so Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia has also its own translation of liturgical, of the pre-service book, that is the text for deacon and priest for vigil and for divine liturgy. Likewise, St. Tikhon's Press have St. Tikhon's Monastery Press has published has reprinted a number of times the text of the Lenten Triodion translation of Metropolitan Callistus and Mother Mary. However, this text is rather, the text which is reprinted is incomplete, and this necessitated publication of the Lenten Triodion supplement, which contains the texts which were not included, that is text for the weekdays of Lent, for the weeks from 2nd to the 6th week, with texts which were not included in the original Lenten Triodion. So the situation that we have, we have likewise in the churches of Russian tradition, we have the plurality of translations, which reflects the multiplicity of Orthodox jurisdiction in North America, Orthodox jurisdiction of the same tradition. The interaction with the new immigrants in both, all three jurisdictions, it necessitates some degree of the continued use of Church Slavonic. However, I would argue that this use of Church Slavonic absolutely has to go hand in hand with the use of modern Russian, if the priests are linguistically capable and choirs linguistically capable of undertaking that task, or that is if the presence of the new immigrants is so significant that the use of these languages, of Slavic languages, heritage language really will attract some people. But of course, the use of Church Slavonic as a liturgical language does not eliminate the problem of comprehensibility, and the inculturation of the new immigrants, their integration into the life in North America, will eventually lead to the English becoming a dominant language, and moreover, gradually, especially speaking about new immigrant situation, the members of the same families for whom main liturgical language is English will be in a better position with regards to comprehensibility of the text and understanding of both the text of the liturgy and the hymnography. So overall, I think that I wanted to characterize the situation in the Russian churches, and I think I will close with this. And if there are any questions, or if there are need for specific examples, I can offer those.
Thank you very much, Professor Permiakov. Let us move now to Professor Suchy-Pilalis. What are your reflections on this?
There. I won't take us back as far as Professor Permiakov did. I'm going to start right in this country. And I'm also going to divide this into two parts, because in this country we have two very different, sometimes overlapping, musical traditions, a choral practice and a chant practice. And I'm going to start with the choral practice. So liturgical composition by Greek or Greek American composers of choral music was in full swing by the post-war years. The majority of the compositions were four-part settings of hymns sung during the Divine Liturgy. Some of the compositions were modally based, in other words, based on the scale of the mode, but not necessarily the formulaic, not really following the laws, one might say, of the mode. Some melodically based, in other words, the chant melody was preserved, but harmonized with little or no regard for the home pitch of the mode. And others were freely composed. So we had a whole variety of composition done. Before that, basically, there was almost the Bible of the choir, the Anastasiou book, which was basically published actually now I have spaced out on the publication date, but was definitely around before World War II, and it was really the staple of what choirs did before composers started composing in this country. So even though more than half of the composers at that time were American-born, almost all compositions were to the Greek text, not to English. So for perhaps the first publication, actually the first publication in English that had really widespread influence was a bilingual divine liturgy hymnal published in 1977 by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese Department of Religious Education. Now, this does not have an imprimatur of the Greek Archdiocese per se. We don't have the same sort of restrictions or narrowing that Professor Permiakov described. We're really very broad as far as translations go until very, very recently. Ernie Villas, the director of the Department of Religious Education, saw a need, and he was also a choral director. And so he made this bilingual service book of the Divine Liturgy into also what he hoped would be basically a book where you could have congregational singing as well. In 1982, there was a second edition, and in that preface, he describes some adjustments between the editions. He states that the music for the Greek and English versions, the music is the same for the Greek and the English. He goes on to say, and this is an excerpted quote, to properly translate and accommodate the English text to our traditional music is a slow process. I think it's fair to say that fitting the translation to the music is representative of the process that was followed by many composers and arrangers of the Greek Archdiocese at that time. So figuring out how to make the music, the text go with the Greek tune, rather than treating it as a mode per se, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the book's popularity was due to the number of non-Greek speaking parishioners, either because of conversion or because of being third generation or whatever. And it was a go-to for priests, so it had a wide dissemination. However, there was also a musical backlash. Somehow the music didn't feel right in English. This was sort of a common complaint. No statistics on how common. While those who objected couldn't really explain why, it was because the music accents and the text accents were often misaligned, and this alignment is a driving force in Byzantine chant. Also because in most cases, the average sentence in English has fewer syllables than in Greek. Melismas were used in places that were primarily syllabic. And I'm just gonna share my screen just quickly. This is not a musical example. And I'm just going to share it without going into a PowerPoint. I'm just going to let it sit here like this. This is, you should be seeing, I hope, are you seeing pages? Yes, good. Okay, so here are the facing pages as they were, and you can see how there's a long melisma here versus what's happening over here. The word theos gets an accent over here, but God starts on an unaccented syllable, etc. This is a sort of issues that were happening that even if people didn't know exactly what was wrong, something didn't feel right when they were singing it. So anyway, in addition to basically this sort of misalignment, other things that were occurring in these early settings that would basically take the melody, the Greek melody is a fixed text, would be word repetition, insertion of unnecessary words, usually adjectives, to make up for the deficit in syllables because English doesn't have as many on average in a sentence. and synonyms that sometimes weren't appropriate would be substituted because they would add more syllables. And I can think of some pretty funny ones, ones that would kind of crack me up when I was singing. Anyway, so poor settings in English sometimes led to the opinion that Byzantine chant could not be done in English. So about the same time that the Green Book was being written in the mid to late 1970s, I was a graduate student at Eastman. I didn't really have a whole lot of contact with the Green Book, as it was known, the Villas book, but I understood, I just loved chant, and I kept listening to it, and I understood that each mode was comprised of a collection of melodic formulas. And I wanted to know, as a student, I wanted to know exactly how these formulas interacted with each other so I could adapt the mode to use the mode to adapt to any text. And this became my research as a modal theorist. So using a process that had begun with my master's thesis, I began to compose chant to any text or translation without any alteration to that text. And thanks to the foresight of Vicky Pappas, I was invited to address the National Forum of Greek Orthodox Church Musicians at several national conferences in the 1980s. I remember the Q&As, they were really, really lively. For some people, what I put forward, that text could generate Byzantine chant, was met with real skepticism and disbelief, and sometimes even a little bit of almost anger. That I could propose something like that. But this does change over time. While I was able to illustrate the flexibility of the modal system, what I found is many churches were not really ready for this sort of approach at that time. And I think we can speak a little more about that later. So while the idea of fitting text to music remained a prevalent approach in the Greek Archdiocese, although eventually with more give and take, the following is part of a position statement from the National Forum of Greek Orthodox Church Musicians, first adopted in 1985 and revised in 2014, and I'm collapsing this quite a bit. The National Forum expresses great concern that there is a proliferation of translations being developed, often by well-meaning amateurs. The Forum calls for the cessation of such activity and strongly urges that the Holy Synod move quickly to approve a standard authorized text for use in the Divine Liturgy to fill an express need in the Church. This is something we now have. The statement continues. With regard to the text of the hymns for the Divine Liturgy and other services, the National Forum urges that they be developed with the involvement of theologians, linguists, poets, and composers, so that the text will be inspirational, poetic, and musical. This is the hybrid approach. This hybrid approach, described above, is the one that's being used for the Forum's Oli Massih project, the all together, like sing all together project, where the translation and musical settings are done by committee. There is a very strong leading towards melodic preservation, but also some melodic flexibility done with the Byzantine compositional approach in mind, if not always strictly followed. The result is a meeting point between those who are immersed in the Byzantine modes and their intimate connection to text, and those who grew up with a particular set melody. So far I've talked basically mostly about SATB choirs, although the Oli Massih project is monophonic, but meant for choirs. So I'd like to turn to chanters for a little bit here. Before there were resources available, the success of including English rested on the willingness of a chanter or priest to find a translation and wing it. However, as the 20th century approached its end, the resurgence of Byzantine chant in Greece began to be felt in the US, as more chanters in this country were musically educated and were able and willing to teach notation, etc., and more immersed in the modal system. This immersion and this willingness to teach is important because without immersion, in these hymns, you cannot really understand the system and be able to improvise and later compose in the modes, unless, of course, you've done extensive analysis. You might think of it this way. If I'm going to write in the style of Bach, I had better not only know the rules of part writing for that era, but I'd better listen to and perform Bach and really know the repertoire. It's not enough to just have brain. It's not enough to just have ear. Both together will make for the best possible outcomes for composition. So I've spent many years in modal analysis in order to compose. However, a somewhat similarly published source that was published and is used by many was developed by St. Anthony's Monastery and has had far more influence to date than what I've done. This website availability is a game changer, as it seems to allow people to compose within the parameters of a given mode, even if they may not be so orally or traditionally immersed. So dedicated chant settings have been made available from a number of melodists in the Greek Archdiocese, including Father Seraphimidis, the Monastery of St. Anthony's, of course, Nancy Takis, John Boyer, many other people. And one of the best conveyors of Byzantine music now has been the extensive website of the Ages Initiative that Richard Barrett is the executive director of. It has flexibility. It offers, sometimes offers multiple settings. It doesn't have settings for everything, but it has a wonderful resource and really is quite a big help. So the approaches of people working on the chant side, they range quite a bit and sometimes range within the person's own corpus. So it could be from meticulously translating to a melody. Nancy Takis and Gomia settings would be a great example of that. To the other extreme, the approach that I use, it is rare for me to have a preconceived idea of where melody should go. When I pray it, the text itself just sings to me. So that's one and the other. And later we're going to talk more about, within this panel, more about how these, you might say extremes, I don't mean them as being extreme in a bad way, might be necessary, coexist, etc. So I'm going to leave that topic for now and just close with that.
Professor, do you perhaps have a musical example that you might be able to offer that would demonstrate your approach?
Certainly. Okay, so I will, if that's the case, I will take the first example, if you would pull that one up.
Sure. Okay. We ready?
This is the day of resurrection. Let us be in you with the people. Pastoral, and to life and from earth to heaven, as Christ proclaims us, as we sing the song of victory.
And then well, let's leave it for that because I'm sure I've overstayed my time here. But the point here is that I'm given a translation. While I may look to the model melody, I am not bound by it. So I may give a friendly nod, I may use parts of it, whatever, but if the text wants something else, then I'm going to go with the text. So for me, the text is going to rule.
All right, thank you very much, Professor. Father John, we move to you.
Hello, everyone. Christ is risen. Thank you for having me at this beautiful gathering. Being an Antiochian, I will talk about the process of the usage of English in the Antiochian Archdiocese. Actually, I can clearly and I can just say that English has been since the inception of this archdiocese in the United States, that it is the primary language. We see that from the 20s, and definitely surely with Metropolitan Anthony Bashir, who became the Metropolitan of the Antiochian Archdiocese in 1936, where he didn't wait any minute, if I can say, and started working on establishing and making sure that there are hymns in English, even to the point of in four-part harmony in Western. And we see that with one of the first things that came out as a translation was what's called the Divine Prayers and Services, came out in 1938, aka the Nasser book, or aka another name for it, the 5-pounder, although it's not 5 pounds, it's like almost around 3 pounds, but that's the name that somehow. Anyway, and those, once you see this book, and if you're familiar with it, you see it's just a collection of main hymns and services from, you name it, from the Oktoikos, Vespers and Orthros, from Triodion, from Orologion, from Mineion, from Pentecostalion, you name it. But we see this major work that it started. And then music wise, we see two very important works, of course, in English. It's the Orthodox hymns in English, aka the Blue Book. You know, I don't know why they keep giving them like color names, Green Book and Blue Book, and there's another one at some point I will talk about in a second, the Yellow Book. But the Orthodox hymns in English, aka Blue Book, by Michael Gilsinger, and in it also you'll see again English. Primarily English with four-part harmony or Byzantine music harmonized. 1950s, we also had a book came out, The Three Divine Liturgies by aka the Yellow Book, came out by Professor Michael Hilko, also four-part harmony. But it's what's interesting in this book is actually has some Arabic transliteration, basically using the English alphabet of some hymns. The Orthodox hymns in English, the Blue Book by Michael Gilsinger in 1939, basically had, interestingly enough, hymns also from Orthros, not only the Divine Liturgy, but also from Orthros in four-part harmony. We have the Evlogitaria, the Blessed Art Thou, O Lord, and we have a great doxology, and then a Divine Liturgy. The three divine liturgies, it's self-explanatory. It is three liturgies also in the four-part harmony in the Western, of course, in English, and there's also in Arabic, like I said. And by the way, I just want to throw this out. In the beginning, when Metropolitan Anthony Bashir started, working on making sure that English becomes the main language, I am going to read something from the introduction of the Book of Orthodox Hymns in English. It's basically, most likely Gilsinger wrote it, but it has the signature of Metropolitan Anthony Bashir. And to see the mentality of the people, how they're thinking ahead, why the importance of the usage of English, and why Metropolitan Anthony Bashir is doing what he's doing. He says, or it says in the introduction of the book, some of our Orthodox people fear that the use of a little English will lead quickly to the exclusive use of English and the loss of the older languages. If they could understand what the exclusive use of the older languages in many parishes is costing the church in the loss of children and adults, they might see that such a fear is indecent. Certainly in the case of Orthodox people who have Protestant children and grandchildren. So that was written again in 1939. There's a story says that some Arabs came to Metropolitan Anthony Bashir complaining to him why the excessive use of English, and they should go back to Arabic. And he simply answered them with a question. And the question was, when you do your businesses, what currency do you use? And they're like, well, US dollars. It's like, well, here's why you need to use English then. Here's your answer to this. Of course, after the 50s and with Metropolitan, in 1966, Metropolitan Philip of thrice blessed memory became the Metropolitan and continued. And he was a great advocate for the English and to make it, now in a way accessible in the Byzantine chant, or if I can say the ecclesiastical style of, the ecclesiastical music of the church as known in the old country, in the Middle East. He introduced, and he actually spent a lot of money, a lot of resources on what's called the Kazan Music Project, which it opened a whole door now, because in a way we did have for a while, and even we see it now a little bit here and there, that Orthros, the Matin service, is kind of like in the Antiochian Archdiocese, like in the Greek churches, it's more like kind of toward Arabic, and then the Levine liturgy is more of English. So by God rest his soul, Basil Kazan, writing in basically all the hymns for Orthros, now it opened a whole new door to use that music, that style of music in English, of course, in Orthros. So after Metropolitan, with this project, because of the civil war in Lebanon and the wars, the Gulf War, the Syrian revolution, or the unrest in Syria, of course, we have new immigrants coming. Nowadays, we see in a way, if I can say, the Archdiocese produces what's called the bilingual. It's basically same as Aegis Initiatives, where we offer services bilingual, Vespers, Orthros, Divine Liturgy, that they're in bilingual, so accessible to both. Of course, with Byzantine, a lot now we're working on Byzantine settings for these texts in English, while also working on having these settings in Western. To answer the second question, which is the perspective on how music has driven or resisted linguistic inculturation. Well, we see in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that there is some kind of rebellion, but I would like to call it assimilation versus practical. In this 40s, 50s, and 60s, we see kind of like we wanted to be, as much as we can, look like Americans. That's why our music, our architecture, our iconography, all of this reflected the Western style. And that's why there is some kind of, that's why English with Byzantine was not that common. It's always been harmonized, but also the practical. And I finish with this. The practical was, whenever you have, if you're going to do 4-part harmony in Orthros, like Gilsinger offered many hymns, well, you need to have 4 or 5 people. Sometimes we're lucky to have one chanter showing up for Orthros. So you cannot do that. So I think that's what, in a way, from the practical side, to be like, not like just because it's a rebellion against, what's old or what's, from the old country. And of course, people usually show up for liturgy, and then, okay, now we can do the 4-part because now we have enough people to do. And I finish with this.
Thank you very much, Father John. Goodness, we have a wealth of things that we can discuss from those 3 introductory reflections. A question that comes to mind for me is, it seems to me that we have 2 very different poles for one aspect of this question. We have 2 very, very different poles. You have sort of the top down and you have the bottom up. In terms of driving change and driving acceptance of new languages and acceptance of revisions even within those new languages. What is the role of authority in how linguistic change happens in our church, and what does it need to be? How has it driven the conversation up to this point, and what are some of the tricky balances that seem to exist? Vitaly, if you could start, perhaps.
Thank you. I think this is, of course, in addition to top-down and bottom-up, there is also a, I would say, like in the middle section. This is the people who actually do the translation, because there's also, I mean, there is, of course, if top is the hierarchy and bottom is actually people on the, and I think there is also actually what is required for in this construction is actually the presence of the experts, and who are both liturgically trained and linguistically trained, who are able to work with whatever the starting language, the language of the original, a language into which it is translated. So it's either, but language of the original, I wouldn't say that this is no offense to for those for whom liturgical language is Greek, but in the context of, for example, my tradition, traditions of the Russian churches, Greek and Slavonic has to be taken in concert, because of course the Slavonic, for example, represents a interpretation of the Greek idiom that becomes eventually acceptable within the tradition of that particular tradition. So I think this is the necessity is the presence of the people who can work with both languages, with the original languages, and able to translate them, not only translate them into the idiom that is comprehensible, but also translate so idiom would be appropriate musically. I think this is I would say I would add that.
Can I say something? It's definitely needed from the top down. Also, we need, as human beings, I think we need sometimes limitations, because sometimes we it's like the sky is the limit, we think, and then everybody wants, and we see that sometimes that everybody will have so many translations in the end, and we kind of get lost. So we need this kind of guidance, from on top. Of course, if when using professional translator and stuff, but at least it has to come from on top, from the hierarchy, what we need, and they have to have the initiate. At the end of the day, if the hierarchy does not approve of the translation or does not approve of the text, we have a problem. But also from the down up, if I can say, well, the work of departments and the work of local Department of Sacred Music in the Antioch Archdiocese, or the SMI sessions that we do, the Sacred Music Institute. So all of these that help, we produce music, we put it for the people can accept it or no, but it has to be, coming out, if I understood you right, Richard, at the end, we need to have this kind of a blessing from the hierarchy.
And I would agree, because the translation is our theology. If we do not have a good translation, we cannot pray it appropriately. It cannot infuse us with what we need spiritually. So we have to start with the translation. And when we have multiple translations all over the place, which we do in the Greek Archdiocese, we are not as organized as some of our fellow jurisdictions. This becomes quite problematic. So I would rather take any good translation and start from that, rather than having a musical idea. So yes, we would need that from the top, and we do need that from the top. I agree.
What about in terms of questions of our current situation? Another something that comes to mind is the role of technology in producing and disseminating translations. We have a problem in all of this of an economics of publishing sort of being unfavorable for what ultimately is kind of a niche audience. And if you have a situation of needing to produce a book that a relatively small number of parishes and musicians and so on are going to buy, it becomes tricky to correct it, and so on. Technology seems to be one possible way around this, at least in the short term, but it seems to perhaps also to raise other risks. What might be some thoughts on that?
I'll start. With that, what I see then, whereas publishing was in a way also restrictive, not only financially, but once you put something in print, it's there. Can't change it easily. What we have is the other extreme now, where people can self-publish so quickly with no boundaries that there is a lot of stuff out there that that may stand the test of time and may not, to put it kindly. So who is deciding on what goes where and how and what standards are being used? This is another problem when publication is so easy that anything can be posted and anything can be disseminated almost too easily. So we've kind of gone from one extreme to another so quickly that I'm very curious. However, I've always said that the Orthodox Church is a little like a self-cleaning oven. You know, lots of stuff comes into the oven after a while. The church itself cleans house. I don't know how long that will take, but you know, or another way to say is the cream will rise to the top eventually, and hopefully that cream doesn't get soured on the way.
I will just add from a pastoral point of view, the only challenge, I see a lot of good things. I mean, it makes it save you on the cost of printing, cost of buying multiple, copies of books. It makes, but I mean, you can actually enlarge it and see it. It just, multiple people can be looking at the same, one book. Just from a pastoral point of view, whenever you have tablets and stuff like this, you might have Wi-Fi, you might be tempted to look into other things while you're, let me check the news, let me check my email, let me do this while it's there, and it happens. Public confession, I've done that, so I think that's one of the things that we just have to be aware of. But in general, overall, it's a great tool. I would like to see, or if anybody wrote about the transfer from manuscripts to books, if it was any kind of like reaction, like, why are we using these books now? What's happening with the manuscript? What was wrong with the roll now? Why do we need to pages like this instead of opening it? Will be interesting. I don't know if that's something, anybody, but anyway, that's what will be my input on this.
Actually, if I might, as a follow-up then to some of these observations, between what Father John just said about the manuscripts and what Jessica said about the self-cleaning oven and the question of authority as well, I just wonder whether sometimes at our vantage point, having got used to what semi-standardized published books, forget how broad the actual hymnographic tradition was. So many thousands of hymns that didn't make it into those books that got published in Venice and Rome during the Renaissance. And it wasn't always necessarily quality, nor was it always quality that filled up the ordinary days of the Mineon. The great feasts are one thing, that we still don't sing the canons of Andrew of Crete and so on. So I wonder if that's something too, as we think about music and language, is there a danger of sort of over-sacralizing the text in some ways, the sung text, versus the scriptures? This was an issue that came up in the last webinar.
I think I fully agree with what Alex just said, is that sometimes the study of liturgical history of the text shows that it's actually how accidental those changes sometimes are. And there is another, because it's not accidental so much as, for example, with some change in liturgical books of the published in 1670, you look at who decided this change, it turns out it was a scribe. who decided, I will just put this note here, which affects the change, which then is perpetuated. And then another problem with the printed books is that, as we know, is just that once you get something in print, it's very hard to get it out. And then you have to actually bring in the Council of Bishops and then have them decide or not decide to do something which to change something for which their approval was not needed. Basically, the approval was not needed to make this change. Now, to undo that change, you need the actual ecclesiastical authority. And in this case, I would actually say that sometimes we tend to we should not. I mean, it's not to question the necessity of hierarchical approval, but the history of the liturgical development of the text shows that it also has to be. We cannot look at bishops as miracle workers. I mean, they have a charism of the office which exceeds ours, but at the same time they are not. They don't necessarily have the knowledge and expertise, and they sometimes need to rely on experts and to actually ask. Well, I think I might get myself in trouble now, but to essentially provide at least if not with the answer with the options. So what are they? What is more accurate? With respect to the liturgical. To the technology, of course, I agree with the previous speakers, is that COVID-19 pandemic has actually shown us that it's actually the use of online technology actually has definite benefit of bringing the church services into people's homes, not just by means of live streaming, but as a text which people can pray. And this also enhances the familiarity of people with liturgical books and familiarity of people with liturgical texts. Now, if they pray the same text as they would have prayed in church, they just know it better, they know it more, and they are in the habit of praying those words and looking. The problem with English the texts is often is a copyright. Of course, it's just Greek and Slavonic are not copyrighted. You can download the entirety, liturgical books in their entirety are online. And with the English language liturgical books, sometimes you run into problems that the publisher would actually object against putting these books online. Sorry.
But for clarification, it's not about just just because the bishop in the end just because of his position, then he can say personally or on his own, well, this I like this or I don't like this. And the point that at least he should at least or expected to have people around him, like you have presidents, they have advisors, but like get the right people to be at least at the end, coming out something official, because you don't want one church is doing something and down the street there's another church because somebody thought like, well, I don't like what came out. I'm smart enough to make my own translation and my own compositions, and then and then just started doing using this. And we've seen, I think, in history, and correct me if I'm wrong, the church has stepped up in places and had to put an end to some of these because they were a little bit taken out of a little bit carried away, if I can say. But it's not just the bishop, just because he's the bishop, well, I like it, and that's how we should listen, or we should just listen to him like this.
Another advantage to technology has been the way that we can share that vehicle of these prayers and services, and that would be the music itself. And another one is maybe a silver lining to the tragedy of COVID, is how we have learned to use technology to teach remotely, because that's, of course, has been a problem in this country, is how do you get to a teacher or someone? How can you use the expertise of someone who is distant? So just to tack on some more things about technology.
I think now might be a good time to take some of the time we have left and transition to some of our audience questions. We've had an excellent question from Kevin Fritz that I think covers a number of the other questions that have been asked. He says, Benedict Sheehan once said to me, and I think he may have attributed this idea to Dr. Lingus, that the limitations of English means that there may never be a uniform English translation, and that this is a good thing, as it means that people can get a sense of the multivalence of the original languages. I would be interested in thoughts on this. And since there is a musical focus to this panel discussion, by extension, is the same thing true of music. There's always the question in the background of things like this: is there ever going to be an American Orthodox music? Well, can there ever really be an American Orthodox music in terms of a single national repertory that the whole church identifies with? Is the variation in both language and music something that is very much characteristic of the American Orthodox Church, whatever that winds up being? Who would like to start?
Well, I think that I don't foresee one narrow American tradition. Even within parishes, I find it often useful, helpful, healthy to have various traditions going on as far as the music goes. And maybe I can just talk about the two parishes that I am chanting in right now. One, of course, would be a Greek Orthodox cathedral, still have immigrants coming in, also have converts, also have third generation, all that is going on. And we have basically the choral tradition that I described earlier, which often has nothing to do with the modes that it's often free composition there. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And then the chanters going on. I'll contrast that with a little mission parish that's where my university is. And there, this mission parish needs to serve people from all jurisdictions. We blend all that together. We basically have chant tradition for matins, vespers, etc. For liturgy, we tend to go more towards Russian-style music. Again, part of that is practical. By that time, we have enough voices, and of course, we have a big music school up there, so good readers are common, good readers of music. So, we can pull that off pretty easily, even though we're very small, and we can say, aha, this student is coming in. What jurisdiction? All right, let's take something from there. We can blend very fast to make people feel at home. I suspect that there will always be some sort of cultural baggage, is too heavy a word, that influences our music. I don't know that having something called American necessarily is necessary, but I think that having variety that fits the parishes should be somehow there, and that's up to the bishop, the priest, etc. So I don't see it as becoming monolithic, and I hope not. If I were to be more technical, I would talk more about the formulas and Byzantine chant specifically, and how I think that indeed will evolve because of linguistic demands. And I could speak more about that at length, but I'll just say that for now.
Should I?
Go ahead.
I think that it's a kind of a banal, from my side, a kind of a banal point, but of course, creation of American chant or American Orthodox liturgical music will, of course, first presupposes that we have a unified American Orthodox Church, which is not a reality now, and but second, I think the necessity of that cannot be artificial creation, because it cannot be. It would be an artificial creation. It will not work. And second, if the translation if the traditions of, let's say, Byzantine Orthodox music and Russian Orthodox music were not translatable into American idiom, that would be would probably necessitate a creation of something kind of. But there we see that they are translatable. They are translatable. They are all very much translatable. And I would say that is the reality of American Orthodoxy. And this is the American Orthodox music. Is that what we have? What we have in our churches? We are all. This is American Orthodox Church.
I'd like to add just one more thing. I'll do this within a chant context, granted. But if I did not have a musical melody in mind from a particular tradition, and in this case, I know that there are many other musical traditions within this particular hymn, but the tradition that has been given to us in this country, what might I compose if I didn't have a limit set by the tradition itself, a melodic limit? And for that, I would like to just use an example where I've been given a text, even though there's a strong melodic tradition within the Greek Archdiocese. The text came from the OCA, and they did not have this limitation in mind to compose this hymn. And Alex, if you would pull up the Christ is Risen. So again, this had no connection with the melody we as Greeks know, love, worship. Actually, I could pull it up here.
Alex, you're muted. You're muted, Alex.
Alex, should I pull it up? Not that one.
Not that one, Alex.
Okay, that's all right. This will do too.
Is that not the right one?
No, this will do too. That's all right.
Okay. Oops, sorry. No. Let's restart it.
So that would be an example of maybe throwing out a tradition within a tradition. And one can think about that, but one also has to consider, what do melodies mean to people psychologically and all this sort of thing. Any change that we do would have to be very measured. And Orthodoxy always moves slowly, so it's a good thing. And we don't know where we are. We're too close to our own history to really see where we are. But this just came to mind when we think about, where does American Orthodoxy go? It may be modal, it may not be, who knows? But certainly it has to have some sort of freedom, not restricted by the past, and yet have some connection to it.
If I can just add my thought on this, like Professor Vitaly said, at the end of the day, we cannot have one American style just because we don't have one jurisdiction. I mean, one church. But even in the specific jurisdiction, we've had that in the Antiochians, where there were some attempts to start like harmonizing Byzantine or come out with their own version of American music based on Byzantine. But in the end, the problem is, with all respect to a lot of these people did not even know Byzantine well enough, or they didn't have any idea about a good solid background on Byzantine chant. So even if when you try to introduce something new, you'd better know the old very well. You need to be very immersed in the old, and then then you start and you let it go organically. I mean, in Arabic, in our culture, it took hundreds of years until we have like something established, literally till the 50s with Dimitri Al-Mur, the protopsalty of the Antiochian Patriarchate, where we saw like where we start having something decent, something like done, very well done, although a couple of, maybe 200, 300, we have 500 years manuscripts, for hymns written in Arabic, but they're like, some of them are like, badly done. But the point is, you just have to be organically, not like forced and pushed just because we're in America somehow, because, well, we're the number one country in the world, and we should somehow, like, we should have music right away, for this just because we're here or something. That it has to be let it be organically done.
All right, well, with that, I think we need to wrap up. Thank you all very, very much for a lively, informative, and wide-ranging discussion. There's, as with the panel 2 weeks ago, there's simply, there's a wealth of topics here to discuss that we can barely scratch the surface of in 90 minutes, but even so, it's well worth it to scratch the surface and at least come up with a starting point for this discussion. So thank you all very, very much. Alex, may I turn it back over to you?
Sure, and again, a big thanks to our hosts at Fordham, at the Orthodox Christian Studies Center there, George Dimokopoulos, Telly Papanikolaou, and we're so grateful that we've been able to cooperate with them in producing these two panels, and we look forward, as George said, to working with them in the future. So thank you all very much, tonight's panelists, and again, Christ is risen.
Truly is risen.
Indeed, he is risen.
Truly he is risen.